The hand came out of the crowd fast and low, and I knew before it touched him that the man meant to take Corporal Wren's bearskin clean off his head and run. I was 4 paces to Wren's left, on the second sentry box of the Harrogate forecourt, and I saw the whole thing arrive. A young man in a bright yellow jacket had been circling the line for 10 minutes, holding his phone out at the end of a long silver stick, talking the entire time to a camera that was not interested in any of us until it was. He had the loud, rehearsed cheer of someone performing for people who were not there yet. And then, mid-sentence, he stopped talking, planted his feet, and lunged for the tall black cap on my fellow guardsman's head as if it were a prize on a fairground hook. He got 2 fingers under the front rim. That was as far as he got. You should understand what we are and what we are not before I tell you the rest, because the man in the yellow jacket understood neither, and it cost him more than he could have dreamed. We are the ceremonial sentries of the House of Harrogate, a wholly old and quiet household, and our post on that forecourt is older than any of us. The bearskin is not a costume. The rifle is not a prop. We stand still not because we are statues, but because stillness is the discipline that lets us watch everything while appearing to watch nothing. People mistake the one for the other constantly. They think a man who does not move cannot move. They are wrong, and Corporal Daniel Wren was about to give them a lesson in exactly how wrong. My name does not matter much to this story. I am the one who was watching, the one who wrote the report, the one the court later called to the stand. Call me a guardsman of the Harrogate detail and leave it there. What matters is that I had served beside Wren for 3 years on that forecourt, and I had never once seen him so much as turn his head at a shout. So when the yellow jacket got his fingers under the rim of that cap, I did not wonder whether Wren would react. I wondered whether I would have to. I did not. Wren's left hand came up off the rifle in a short, clean arc and closed over the brim of the bearskin, pinning it to his own head, and the whole motion took less than the time it takes to read this sentence. He did not stagger. He did not shout. His boots did not shift on the cobblestones. The yellow jacket, who had thrown his whole weight backward expecting to come away with a trophy, found himself yanking against a man who had become, in an instant, as fixed as the gatepost. He stumbled. His silver stick clattered to the stones, and the cap stayed exactly where it had always been, level and black and immaculate, over the face of a man whose eyes had not left the middle distance. For a moment nobody understood what they had seen. Then the laughter started, not at Wren, at the man in the yellow jacket scrambling on the cobblestones for his phone. He should have left then. I have thought about that often. If he had picked up his stick and his pride and walked out the Harrogate arch, he would have been a clip that a few hundred people laughed at, and nothing more. But men who film themselves doing things for strangers are not built to walk away from a crowd, and this one had just realized the crowd was bigger than he'd planned. 3 coach parties had emptied onto the forecourt that morning. There were perhaps 200 people watching now, half of them with phones up, and the man in the yellow jacket looked around at all of them and decided that the only thing worse than failing was failing quietly. He got to his feet, brushed off his knees with theatrical care, and held the phone up at arm's length again. Okay, he said, loud enough for the back of the crowd. Round 2. They're not allowed to touch you, that's the whole thing, they literally cannot stop you, and he pointed at Wren as if presenting a contestant. Watch this. Watch. I felt the morning change shape around me. There is a particular stillness that comes over a crowd when it senses that something has stopped being funny, and I felt it settle over the forecourt like the shadow of a cloud. The phones did not come down. If anything, more of them went up. People will film a thing they are uneasy about more readily than a thing that merely amuses them, and the yellow jacket had just promised them all a second attempt at the man who hadn't moved. What he did not know, what he could not have known, because Wren wore it the way he wore everything, invisibly, was who he had chosen. Daniel Wren had stood that gate through a state visit, through a winter when the cobbles iced over and 3 sentries went down with fever, and he covered their hours without comment. Through the long gray morning we buried old Sergeant Maddox, and Wren held the inner post for 9 hours and never once asked to be relieved. He was not a young man playing soldier for the tourists. He was the steadiest hand on the Harrogate detail, and he had taken an oath about that post that the man in the yellow jacket would not have understood if it were read to him slowly. But the law does not require a provoker to understand the man he provokes. The law only requires that we be able to say, afterward, exactly what happened and in what order. And so I will. The yellow jacket came in again. This time he did not go for the cap. This time, and I saw it, and I would say it under oath, and I did. He reached past the brim and grabbed a fistful of the bearskin's fur near the crown, and he wrenched downward and sideways with both hands, dropping his weight, trying to tear the whole thing free by main force. 2 things happened that he had not accounted for. The first was the chin strap. The Harrogate bearskin is held by a strap that runs under the lower lip, and it is not a decoration either. It is rated to hold the cap through a gallop, through wind off the river, through everything but a deliberate assault, and even then it does not give cleanly. So when the yellow jacket wrenched, he did not pull the cap off Wren's head. He pulled Wren's head. He hauled my fellow guardsman's skull sideways by a strap under his jaw, hard enough that I heard Wren's breath go out through his nose in a short, controlled hiss. The only sound I had ever heard him make on that post. The second thing was me. I came off my box. I want to be precise about this, because the precision is the whole point. I did not run at the man. I did not shout. We are trained that the worst thing 2 armed sentries can do in a crowd of 200 is turn a stupid stunt into a stampede. I came down off the box at a walk, my rifle at the carry, and I called the line in the flat, carrying voice we use for exactly this. The one that is not a shout but reaches every corner of a stone courtyard. Stand away from the sentry. Stand away now. He did not stand away. He looked over his shoulder at me, this man hanging his whole body weight off another man's jaw, and he grinned at the camera and said the words that I would hear read back in a courtroom 3 months later in a voice with no grin in it at all. He can't do anything, the yellow jacket said. That's the dare, that's the whole dare. He was about to find out how completely wrong a man can be. Here is what people who say a sentry can't do anything have never bothered to learn. We are not forbidden to act. We are forbidden to act for ourselves. A sentry does not break his post because a man insults him, or films him, or calls him a statue, because his pride is not on that gate. The gate is on that gate, and his pride is left at the barracks where it belongs. But the post is not a vow of helplessness. A man laying hands on a sentry of the house is no longer a nuisance. He is committing an offense against the post itself, and the post is precisely the thing the sentry is sworn not to abandon. The yellow jacket had crossed, without the faintest idea he was crossing it, a line that turned Wren from a man who would not react into a man who was now required to. And Wren had been waiting for exactly that line, with the patience of a man who has stood a great many hours and learned the difference between an insult and an assault. He moved. Not wildly, I have to keep saying this, because the whole worth of what he did lives in the restraint, but with the economy of a man who has rehearsed a thing 1,000 times in the cold so that he need not think about it in the heat. His right hand left the rifle and crossed his own body, and instead of swinging at the man hanging off his jaw, Wren's gloved fingers closed over the man's wrist where it gripped the fur. He found the small bones there, the ones that do not like to be pressed, and he pressed. It was not a blow. There was nothing in it a camera could turn into a guardsman striking a tourist. It was a hold, the kind they teach you to take a knife away with, applied at perhaps 1/10 of its strength, and the yellow jacket's fingers opened of their own accord, because the body lets go of things when the wrist says so, no matter what the man wants. The bearskin came free of his hand. Wren's head came level again, and for one breath the two of them stood joined, the sentry's white glove around the wrist of the man who had assaulted him, the man's face going from performance to confusion to the first cold edge of fear. "You're hurting me," the yellow jacket said, and the grin was gone now, and so was the voice for the camera. He said it the ordinary way, the way a man says a true thing when he is surprised by it. "Stand still," Ren told him, 2 words. The first words I had ever heard him speak on post. His voice was perfectly level. "You have laid hands on a sentry of the house. You will stand still until you are taken in charge." I had reached them by then. I stepped to the man's other side and took his free arm at the elbow, not roughly. We do not need roughly when there are 2 of us and the law on our side. And between us, we turned him so that his back was to Ren's post, and his front was to the long open run of the forecourt, where 2 of the gate wardens were already coming at a fast walk, their hands loose and ready, having heard my call across the stones. The crowd had gone very quiet now. The phones had not. I remember thinking, even in the middle of it, that every angle of this was being recorded by 200 strangers, and that this was the best thing that could possibly happen to us and the worst thing that could possibly happen to him. He had wanted footage. He was about to get more footage than any man has ever wanted. "Let go of me," he said, twisting. "Get off, this is assault. You're assaulting me, it's all on camera." "Yes," I said, "it is." That stopped him for a second. I do not think he had ever considered that the camera might be a witness against him rather than for him. The men who build their lives out of filming things have a strange faith that the lens is always on their side, that the record will always tell the story they meant to tell. It does not. The record tells the story that happened, and the story that happened, frame by frame, was a man circling an armed sentry, lunging twice, and finally hanging his whole weight off the sentry's jaw by a strap, while the sentry stood, held his post, and used the smallest possible force to free himself and hold the man for the wardens. There was not a frame in 200 phones that helped him. He just didn't know it yet. The wardens reached us. Warden Coyle, a broad, steady man who had run the Harrogate gate for 11 years, took the yellow jacket from my hands with a grip that brooked no argument and said, quietly, the formal words, that the man was being detained on the forecourt of the house pending the arrival of the constables, on suspicion of assault upon a sentry and of attempted theft of items of the uniform of the house. The second warden, a younger fellow named Pratt, had already stepped back to begin the thing none of us said aloud but all of us understood. He was noting faces, the men and women near the front with their phones still up, the witnesses, the record beyond the record. The yellow jacket heard the word theft and laughed one short, disbelieving bark. "Theft! It's a hat, it's a hat." I gave it back, I didn't even take it. "You took hold of it and pulled it with intent to carry it off," Coyle said, without heat. "Whether you succeeded is for the court. We'll let them sort it." And he walked the man toward the gatehouse, the younger warden falling in behind, and the yellow jacket went protesting, but he went, because there is a moment when even the loudest man understands that the room has stopped laughing with him. Ren had not moved again. By the time I looked back at him, he was exactly as he had been at the start of the morning, rifle at the slope, cap level, eyes forward, gloves white, the only difference a faint redness along his jaw where the strap had bitten. He stood his remaining hour like that, in front of 200 people who now watched him the way you watch a thing you have decided you respect. I took my own box again. We did not speak. There was nothing to say that the morning had not already said. But the morning was not finished with the man in the yellow jacket. It had barely begun. I came off post at the change and went to the gatehouse, because Coyle wanted the man who had been 4 paces away and seen the whole thing, and because I needed to write it down while it was clean in my head. A report written an hour after a thing is worth 10 written a day after. I sat at the warden's narrow desk with the kettle ticking behind me and put down the morning in order. The circling, the first lunge, the laughter, the second lunge, the fur, the strap, the wrist, the hold, the words, the detention, times where I had them. I have written a great many such reports, and I have learned to leave out everything I feel and put in only what I saw. The feelings are not evidence. The order of events is. The yellow jacket sat in the holding room across the passage with the door open and a warden in the frame of it. And through that open door I learned, in the next half hour, the whole shape of the man. His name I will not give it, because giving it would do for him the one thing he wanted and does not deserve, which is to be talked about, was the brand he had built. He ran a channel. The whole point of the channel, as he explained to anyone who would listen and several who would not, was the dare. He went to places where men were not allowed to react, and he provoked them, and he filmed the not reacting. And the not reacting was the content, he told the warden. He had done it to museum attendants and to men outside banks, and twice before to ceremonial sentries at other gates, and nothing had ever happened, and that nothing was the foundation of his entire faith. "They can't touch you," he kept saying to the warden, to the room, to no one. "It's the whole format, it's the bit. He's not allowed. He's allowed to stop a man assaulting him," the warden said, not for the first time. "It's a had. I want to be fair to him, because the court tried to be, and so should I. I do not think the man in the yellow jacket woke that morning intending to commit a crime. I think he woke intending to do a thing he had done 100 times, that the law had never bothered to chase him for, that the men he did it to had never had the standing or the will to press. He had built his entire understanding of the world on a single false belief, that there is a kind of man you are allowed to do anything to, because that man's whole job is to take it. He had met that belief everywhere he went, and it had never once been corrected. It was being corrected now, in a stone room with the door open, and he could not yet feel it, the way a man who has cut himself deeply does not feel it for the first few seconds and looks at the blood with mild surprise. Then the constables came. There were 2 of them, and they were not impressed by the camera, and they were not impressed by the brand, and they had the particular flat patience of people who deal all day with men who are sure the rules do not apply to them. They took Coyle's account, and they took mine, and they took the man's, and then the senior of the 2, a sergeant with gray at his temples and a notebook he wrote in slowly, asked the question that changed the temperature of the room. "You're telling me you've done this before, to other guards? At other gates?" "It's my channel," the man said, brightening because he thought he was being recognized. "Yeah, loads of times. You can watch them, they're all up. It's like it's a whole series. It's the thing I'm known for." The sergeant wrote that down, slowly, and I watched the man's face as he realized far too late what he had just done. He had not been asked for a confession. He had volunteered a pattern. He had told a police officer on the record in front of 3 witnesses that the thing he had done that morning was not a one-off, not a misjudgment, not a stumble, but a method, repeated, deliberate, and filmed for profit. He had handed the court the one thing that turns a stupid moment into a case: intent, shown over time. "I'd like to see the channel," the sergeant said. That was the moment, I think, that the man in the yellow jacket first understood that he was in real trouble, not embarrassment, not a viral clip, but the kind of trouble that has a date and a building and a man in a robe at the end of it. The brightness went out of him all at once. He asked in a much smaller voice whether he needed a solicitor, and the sergeant told him, kindly enough, that he was free to call one, and that it would probably be wise, and the man's hands shook a little as he took out the phone he had used to film the whole thing and could not now stop being used against him. They took him out through the side arch, away from the forecourt, so as not to make a spectacle of it. The house does not make spectacles. It leaves that to the men who come to make spectacles of the house. I watched the constable's car turn down the river road, and I went back and finished my report and signed it, and I thought that was the end of my part in it. I was wrong about that too. The morning had set something in motion that would take 3 months to arrive, and when it arrived it would be in a courtroom, and I would be standing in it. And so, in a manner the man in the yellow jacket could never have predicted, with the footage from 200 phones. By that evening the clip was everywhere. Not the clip he had wanted, of course. He never got to post his own. The footage that went round the world was filmed by strangers, a dozen angles of the same 40 seconds, cut together by people who had been standing in that crowd, and every one of them told the same story, because the truth told from any angle tells the same story. There was the man circling. There was the first lunge and the cap held fast. There was the laughter. There was the man pointing at Ren and saying he can't do anything, that's the dare. And there was Ren, still, level, immaculate, taking the wrist, freeing his cap, and saying stand still in a voice you could hear over the crowd because the crowd had gone silent to let it through. People did not share it to laugh at the sentry. They shared it to watch a man who would not be moved finally move exactly once, exactly enough, and not 1 inch further. Older men shared it most of all, men of my own father's age, who wrote things underneath it about discipline and about how rare it had become to see a man hold himself in check when every excuse to let go was handed to him. They were not wrong. That was the thing the morning had on offer, and the man in the yellow jacket had built the stage for it himself, without ever once suspecting he was the one who would look small on it. But the footage of that morning was only half of what undid him. The other half he had made himself, over years, and posted with his own hands. Because once the stranger's clips went round, people did the thing he had invited the police sergeant to do. They went and watched his channel. The whole back catalog, the whole series, and what had played to his audience as cheeky and harmless when it was scattered across years and dressed in bright music and laughing captions, read very differently when it was lined up end to end and viewed by people who were no longer his audience but his jury, in spirit and soon enough in fact. Here was the same man harassing a museum attendant who had plainly asked him 3 times to stop. Here he was snatching at the cap of a sentry at a different gate, in a different city, 8 months before. Here he was crowding an old doorman against a wall for a laugh. It was, the prosecution would later say, a documented habit of targeting men constrained from defending themselves, and he had documented it himself, monetized it, and pinned it to the top of his own page under the words best of. There is an old soldier saying that a man digs most of his own graves with his own mouth, and the modern version is that he uploads them. The man in the yellow jacket had spent years building the precise body of evidence that the court would use to decide he had known exactly what he was doing. His defense wanted to call it a prank. His own archive called it a pattern. You cannot, it turns out, claim a thing was a harmless misunderstanding when you have 100 videos proving you understood it perfectly and did it on purpose for money. In the weeks that followed, I learned things about Ren. I had served beside him 3 years without knowing, because the press went looking and the house, very quietly, let a little of it be known. Not to make a hero of him, the house does not do that, but because a man falsely painted as a brute who manhandled a tourist deserved the truth said plainly. Ren had served 11 years before he ever came to the gate. He had carried men out of places I will not name. He had a steadiness that was not natural but earned, paid for in years most people would not survive, and it was that steadiness, not coldness, not contempt, that let him stand a man hanging off his jaw and respond with a wristlock at 1/10 of its strength, instead of the blow that 99 men in 100 would have thrown and been forgiven for. The discipline that the yellow jacket had treated as helplessness was in fact the only thing that had kept the morning from becoming something genuinely ugly. Ren had protected the man who assaulted him, from a stampede and from a real injury, and most of all from Ren himself. That was the part almost nobody understood until it was explained slowly by a barrister in a wood-paneled room. There was a moment in the long middle weeks before the trial when the thing nearly turned the wrong way, and I want to set it down honestly, because it is the part that taught me the most about why the law and not the crowd is the right place for a thing like this to end. For about a week the man fought back the only way he knew. He could not post the footage. His solicitor had surely told him what every angle of it showed, but he could talk, and he did in a long, tearful recording made in a dim room in which he was no longer the cheery dare man but a victim. He had been attacked, he said, by a trained soldier, over nothing. He showed his wrist. He said the establishment was crushing a young creator for a harmless joke, that they had armed men who could do as they liked to ordinary people, that he was frightened and ruined and sorry he had ever gone near the gate. And for a few days, a certain kind of person believed him, and there was a noise online about jackbooted guards and brutalized youths, and I confess it sat badly with me, to have done the right thing in the right order and watch it dressed up, by a man with a camera, as the wrong thing done by us. Ren never said a word about it. I asked him once on the box in the low voice we use when no one is near, whether the talk bothered him. He looked forward at the forecourt for a while and then he said, "The footage doesn't lie and the law doesn't watch the noise. Let it run." That was all. Let it run. And it did run, and then it ran out because the one thing the man's victim recording could not survive was the same thing nothing of his could survive. His own archive, sitting there in public, hundreds of videos of him doing the exact thing he now swore he had never meant to do. You cannot hold up a sore wrist as proof of your innocence to a public that can, with 2 clicks, watch you do the identical thing to a dozen other men who never raised a hand. The noise turned. By the end of that week, the same people who had pitied him were the ones lining up his old clips end to end, and the victim recording itself became simply one more piece of evidence that he understood, perfectly, what he had been doing. He had tried to play the crowd one last time, and the crowd, having seen the record, would not be played. The man's brand did not survive the autumn. Sponsors that had paid him to be cheeky did not wish to be paid back in headlines about assault. The platform that had hosted his series took the series down, not out of conscience but out of liability, the moment the charges were confirmed. He went, in the space of a season, from a man whose entire living was being watched to a man who could not bear to be looked at. But the channel and the money were never the point, not for the house and not for me. The point was the post. The point was that a sentry of Harrogate had been assaulted on his own ground, in front of 200 witnesses, and that this would be answered not by a brawl that the man could cry foul over, not by a viral humiliation that would fade in a week, but by the slow, unglamorous, unstoppable machinery of the law, which has no audience to play to and no format to protect, and which arrives, when it arrives, with a date and a building and a man in a robe. The date came in the autumn. The building was the city's old assize court, gray stone and high windows, and the man in the robe was about to hear, from me and from Ren and from 200 phones, exactly what happens to a man who is certain there is a kind of person he is allowed to do anything to. I had never given evidence in a court before. I will tell you it is nothing like standing a post and everything like it at once. You stand. You keep still. You speak only when spoken to and only to the point. The room wants you to embroider, to editorialize, to make the man across the room into a monster, and the discipline of it is to refuse, to give the court the order of events and nothing more, and let the order of events do the work. I had written my report well in that ticking gatehouse 3 months before, and I found that all I had to do on the stand was tell the truth in the same order I had written it. The circling, the first lunge, the cap held, the laughter, the pointing. He can't do anything, that's the dare. The second lunge, the fur, the strap, the wrench. The hiss of breath through my fellow guardsman's nose, the wrist, the hold at 1/10 of its strength. Stand still, you have laid hands on a sentry of the house. The wardens, the detention. The man's barrister rose to cross-examine me, and I had been warned by our own counsel exactly where he would go, and he went there. He suggested, in the smooth way they have, that Corporal Wren had used force, that the man in the dock had a sore wrist for a week, that a trained soldier laying a hold on a member of the public was, whatever the provocation, an act of violence by a powerful man against a weaker one. "Did the corporal strike my client?" he asked. "No," I said. "Did he shout at him, threaten him?" "He told him to stand still." "Once. And yet you say he applied a wrist lock, a combat technique, to a young man holding a hat." "He applied a hold," I said, "at a fraction of its strength to free his own cap from a man who had hold of his head by the chin strap, and to keep that man still until the wardens came. If the corporal had wanted to use force, sir, the man would not have walked out of the forecourt. He'd have been carried. The corporal could have done a great deal. He chose to do the least thing that would work. That is the whole of his training, and it is the reason your client is sitting in that chair and not in a hospital. The barrister did not like that, and he tried twice more to make the hold into the crime, and both times I gave him the same plain answer, because there was only one true answer, and a man on a stand has no business inventing a second. Then he sat down, and the court turned to the footage. That was the part the man in the dock had brought upon himself, and I watched it land on him. They played the stranger's clips first. On a screen the whole room could see angle after angle of the same 40 seconds, and in every one of them the story was identical, and in every one of them his own voice rang out clear. He can't do anything, that's the dare, that's the whole dare. You could feel the room change with each repetition. A jury does not need a barrister to tell it what it is seeing when it can see it 12 times from 12 directions. And then, because the defense had called it a harmless prank, the prosecution was permitted to answer the word harmless, and they did it with his own archive. They played him at the museum. They played him at the other gate 8 months before, snatching at another sentry's cap exactly as he had snatched at Wren's. They played him crowding the old doorman against the wall. They did not editorialize either. They simply let the man's own years of footage prove that the thing he called a one-off prank was a documented, deliberate, repeated method, and that he had known, every single time, exactly what he was doing, and that the men he did it to could not, he believed, defend themselves. When Wren took the stand, the room went as quiet as the forecourt had on the morning itself. He wore his uniform by leave of the house because the court had asked it of him. They wanted the jury to see the post, not just a man. He answered as I had answered, plainly, briefly, in order, with no heat in it. The barrister tried the same line on him, the powerful soldier against a weak young man line, and I watched Wren take it without the smallest change in his face, the way he had taken everything on that gate for 3 years. "You're a trained killer," the barrister said at last, abandoning the smoothness, going for the room, "and you laid hands on an unarmed young man over a hat." Wren let the silence sit a moment. Then he said the only long thing I ever heard him say. "I am a sentry of the house," he said. "My post is a thing older than me, and it will be there after me, and while I stand it, it is mine to keep. A man may insult me on that post, and I will not move, because my pride is not what I am guarding. But the cap on my head is the uniform of the house, and the man who tries to tear it from me by force is not insulting me. He is laying hands on the post itself, and on the household I am sworn to. I am not permitted to abandon that to a man's amusement. I held him as gently as the situation allowed, because the discipline of my service is not the freedom to do nothing. It is the duty to do only and exactly what is required, and not one thing more. He has a sore wrist. He could have had a great deal worse from a dozen men in that crowd if I had not held him still and held myself stiller. The restraint he mistook for helplessness is the only reason this is a courtroom and not something worse. He did not raise his voice once. He did not look at the man in the dock. When he had finished, he simply waited, in case there was a further question, and there was not, because there was nothing left to ask. The barrister sat down. I have stood in a great many quiet rooms in my life, on a great many silent posts, and I have rarely felt a silence as complete as the one that followed a sentry explaining, plainly, the difference between a man who cannot act and a man who chooses, at great cost, to act only as much as honor requires. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. They found him guilty of assault upon the sentry, and guilty of the attempted theft of an item of the uniform of the house. And the judge, in sentencing, said the thing that I have carried with me ever since, the thing that was the true verdict on the whole affair. He said that the court had been asked to treat the matter as a prank, and that it could not, because a prank requires the consent of the man it is played upon, and a sworn sentry who is required by his oath to stand still has, by the very nature of his post, no power to consent and no power to refuse. To target such a man, the judge said, precisely because he is constrained from defending himself, is not mischief. It is a calculated act against the most disciplined and least protected, and the law would not pretend otherwise. He handed down a custodial sentence, suspended, with a long stretch of community supervision and an order to pay costs and compensation, and more lastingly than any of it, a criminal record, in the name the man had spent years hiding behind a brand that would follow him into every future the brand had promised and could no longer deliver. The man who had built a living out of the certainty that there is a kind of person you are allowed to do anything to had been told, by the whole weight of the law, in front of the public he had played to, that there is no such person. There never was. He had simply been doing it all those years to men who could not yet make him answer for it. Now one had. We did not speak of it much, Wren and I. That is not our way. The morning after the verdict we were back on the Harrogate forecourt at the change of guard, the cobbles wet, the coaches arriving, the phones going up the way they always do. A man in a bright coat got close to the line and lifted his phone, and I felt the old wariness move through me. But the man only took his photograph, said something cheerful to his children, and moved along, the way the great and decent many of them do. And Wren stood his post beside me, rifle at the slope, cap level and black and immaculate, eyes forward, white gloves still, unchanged, unbroken, exactly the man he had been before any of it, because the thing he was guarding had never for one moment been himself. I have thought a great deal about what the man in the yellow jacket got so badly wrong, and it comes to this. He looked at a man who would not move and saw a man who could not. He thought the stillness was the absence of power. It was the discipline of it, the hardest kind there is, the kind that holds enormous force in a closed hand and opens that hand only the exact width that honor requires, and not a finger wider. He came to take a hat off a man who could not stop him, for the amusement of strangers. He left with a record, a ruin, and a lesson the law had to spell out for him, because he had never once learned it on his own, that the most disciplined man on that forecourt was not the one least able to answer him. He was the one most able, and the one least willing to do more than was right. And that, in the end, was the whole of the dare, and the whole of why it ended where it did, with a sentry back at his post, level and still, keeping a thing far older and far greater than the pride of any man who ever tried to take his cap.